Hello, BookTube. Just a couple of quick updates for the channel here. First one, first one is kind of silly, but enough of you seemed interested, so I thought I would update you on it, and that's my gardening plans. I mentioned last year that I came to the idea late last year, too late, that I might want to try gardening for the first time in my life. And I thought, what better way to do it than with an infinite support system, all of you to give me tips and warnings and ideas and whatnot. But I was a little too late to do it. Fall was already on us. So I thought and cogitated and read books over the winter, and now it's time, theoretically, on the calendar to start seriously thinking about doing this. And I came to two major decisions in my gardening plans that I wanted to share with you for those of you who are interested. There is bookish stuff coming right after this, though. The first one is that I have made the momentous decision that I am going to grow flowers instead of vegetables. So that's a big difference there. I was kind of sort of thinking about growing vegetables this whole time that I've been thinking about having a garden. But instead, at least to start, I'm going to grow flowers instead. So those of you who gave me tons of advice on growing vegetables, I'd like you to shift gears and give me advice on growing flowers. That is thing number one. That is realization number one. I'm going to grow flowers. Realization number two is that since this is a complete hobby and I'm going to stink at it for the first few years, I am not willing to suffer for it. It is pitch dark and freezing cold in Boston today, with days left to go in April. It has, with the exception of 4 days, it has been freezing cold in Boston since early September of last year. That's almost a whole year. I am operating still under the assumption, since trees are budding out, I am operating still under the assumption that summer is going to come. Some form of summer is going to come to Boston. But one thing I realized, in addition to the fact that I'm going to grow flowers instead of vegetables, I also realized that I am not going to work this garden in the cold. I don't like the cold. I hate the cold. Very different from the younger Steve, but I do. I hate it. I require that it be sunny and warm for me to garden. If those conditions come, well then fine. I will do this. I am now operating under the assumption, I know this is exaggerated, but I'm operating the assumption now that it is not, in fact, going to be warm enough in Boston ever for me to garden outside. I'm operating the assumption now that for about 6 weeks, from late July into August, it's going to be warm enough for me to go outside without being in pain, and that's not long enough to grow anything. I'm obviously going to be wrong about that. There will be a spring and summer. It's just this week has been really dispiriting. But if something like that happens, if it turns out that I am so sensitized to the cold now that I am not willing, that I'm uncomfortable being outside all the way until July, or even mid-June, I think would be too late for most things. That still doesn't kill the dream. I could still think about gardening indoors. So another thing I might want to learn about is gardening indoors. I have space. I could garden indoors if it's possible. Hydroponic, is that what it is? Container gardening? I imagine some of that would be possible, even indoors, if I rearrange things so that I maximum sunlight, or even got lamps of some kind or other. Anyway, that's a back burner plan. I am still operating on the assumption that someday, somehow, it will warm up here in Boston. Not for just a day, but for the foreseeable future. That is apparently not going to happen in the next solid week. This is Friday. The next solid week of forecast is windy, rainy, and cold, all the way into May. Maybe after that, it will start. Timetables, I'm not really sure of timetables. I'm not sure if it differs with flowers. But you can tell me all about that, and I will read all about it as well. So that's update number one. Update number two deals with books, which is that this is Friday. This weekend, we do our final read-through. We end our read-along of Anthony Trollope's novel, Phineas Redux, which means that we need to start thinking about what our next read-along is going to be. I have plenty of ideas in mind, but I would love to hear ideas from you. The natural idea, the one that a lot of people have suggested, it isn't just Wilson. Wilson, of course, suggested, but lots of other people did too. The number one idea so far is to just barrel on with Trollope. Go straight to the Prime Minister. In fact, a couple of you, two of you know me in real life and have heard me talk about Trollope since long before there was such a thing as BookTube, much less since I was on BookTube. And those two people have said, well, your BookTube followers don't know how much you love Prime Minister, and a lot of them won't remember that the book after that, The Duke's Children, is your favorite Trollope of them all. Maybe they don't know that your passion would actually be even increased if they went straight on to these next two. But another part of me says, do you need to know that? Maybe that's too much Trollope all at once. Maybe we ought to space these things out and do something different in May. But one way or another, I wanted to put it before you. I'm just making a quick video. I want tons of advice on growing flowers. I want tons of people telling me that I'm being a big baby and that, of course, warm weather is going to come to Boston. And I also want to know what your ideas are for our next read-along. What should we do in May? Should we go straight on to the Prime Minister's, or should we read something else? And if so, what do you have in mind? I operating under, the one stricture that I've kind of sort of been doing here. I would like every read-along to be a discrete month-long experience. I really don't want to carry things over into a second month on one book, which kind of limits us in length of book, because otherwise you'd be asking people to read hundreds of pages a week. But the other thing is, I'd kind of like the book to be in the common domain. It doesn't necessarily have to be a canonical work. There's tons of stuff in the common domain. I haven't looked around on Project Gutenberg, for instance, to see what's out there. But I'd like those two things, mainly the common domain thing. I don't want anybody to put out for money to do this. So I wanted to get the ball rolling. Let's start thinking about what we want to do for May. And also flood me with advice about growing flowers. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. That's all for now. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.